sheet. Okay, so hello. This panel is part of a book program track of Comic-Con Prague, which is going to happen on from the 15th to 17th October. We are recording this in advance, and it's our pleasure to welcome here David Weber and Eric Flint, the authors of the just released book To End in Fire. I believe it was published 2 days ago on Amazon or something like that. And of course, David Weber is known in the Czech Republic mostly for his Honor Harrington series, but also Starfire series, Prince Roger series, Save Holt, and I dare say many more. And of course, in Czech Republic, Eric is known also as a co-writer of several Honorverse novels, but also as the author of the best-selling 1632 series or Ring of Fire series, as well as Belisarius series, and again, many more. And I think it can actually lead to the first question. Gentlemen, do you even remember how many books you have published, roughly?
No. Every so often, I kind of do a count so I can tell people, and then I promptly forget again. I think that counting the collaborations, I've got like 72 novels now, somewhere in that vicinity. And then there's 7 or 8 anthologies that are in the Honorverse rather than just that I've contributed to somewhere else. Eric, you've got that whole 1632 Empire of Crime thing,
If you, assuming you include collaborations, my count's about the same as yours. I think it might be 2 books higher, something like that.
But yours are short.
Mine are short. Yeah. Mine are slender volumes.
Until you fall into evil company, then they,
right. The longest novel I've ever written solo was 1636, The Ottoman Onslaught, and that's like 190,000 words. I have never broken 200,000 on my own. I've done it with other people.
What's the longest Belisarius, Eric?
The longest is 150,000 words.
Okay.
They're all 135, 150,000 words separately.
Yeah.
6 of them. So
yeah.
But they're not particularly long. The longest book I've ever written was The Shadow of the Lion, which I did with Mercedes Lackey. That was 290,000 words, but you still have books longer than that in
I think I only have like one that might be longer than 290,000.
Well, yeah, I know War of Honor was.
Yeah, but War of Honor was too long. I mean,
Well, no, it was. I remember at the time, because you were really under the gun on that book, and you asked me to read it real quick and give me your opinion as to whether you should, cut it or not. And I read it and I said, David, yeah, it's too long. You really ought to cut maybe 10% of it out. But you're under the gun, and here's the truth of it, being cold-blooded about it. People who are mad at you because you wrote a 300,000 word novel are going to be mad at you because you wrote a 270,000 word novel. So, the hell with it. It would be improved if you trimmed it back. Yeah.
Well, the problem was that we just plain flat ran out of time for me to do the final edit on it.
I know.
Tony and I have been talking for a while about doing an author's cut edit and re-releasing it after I've had a chance to work on tweaking and tightening it a bit. There's nothing in that book that doesn't need to be there. The problem is some of it's there more than once.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
The longest book in the 1632 series is one I did, one of the 2 I did with you, 1634 to Baltic War. That's 260,000 words. Other than that, the longest are ones I do with Chuck Gannon, because Chuck writes long also, although
Yep.
he does it for a different reason than you do. He has very complex plots, and that just tends to make for a very long book.
Yeah.
Just because I don't, my plots tend to be simpler.
Well, it's
Anyway,
kind of it. I think that most writers have a natural length
yeah,
for them, the types of stories that they like to tell. I've got, it's like if you look at the Excalibur alternative and some of the other standalones that I've done, they tend to run substantially shorter. But that's because I'm approaching them as single standalone books, like Old Soldiers, the Bolo novel, kind of thing. The ones that run longest for me are the ones that are part of an ongoing series, because they're threaded together along the chain. And it's the size of the storytelling bite that really dictates word count to me.
yeah, it's the same way with me. I think my longest standalone novel is my first one, Mother of Demons, which was 120 some odd thousand words.
And is one of my favorite things you ever wrote.
Yeah, I know it is, and I know why too. For all our various differences on other issues, we basically look at human history the same way. By which I mean neither one of us has a tragic view of history, or an ironic one. It's basically heroic, to use the classic tripartite models of how you look at things. And so yeah, I remember when you told me that, it didn't actually surprise me. It's one of my favorite books too.
Well, I'll tell you something else. Did you ever notice that the first book that you meet an author you really, really love, okay, nothing else they ever do quite measures up to that first book that you met them with, because you never get to meet them for the first time over again.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's true.
It's kind of like the Sharon's nephew, Robert, a huge Star Wars fan. Okay. But he never got to sit in a theater and watch the ship come overhead for the very first time,
I remember that's why I saw it in the theater, and I remember when the ship came over, and I'm sitting there thinking, "Oh wow!"
And then you realize that was the small one,
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking, going away from the first books to the latest books, so To End in Fire was published a few days ago, and it's kind of unique because it's both the continuation of the Crown of Slaves sub-series, which you are working on together, and as well as the continuation of the main storyline, unless I'm mistaken. And of course, it features again Anton Zilvicki and Victor Kasha. And so, unless we are mistaken, the story sort of wraps up the main fight against the Misan alignment, or the conflict with the Misan alignment.
Yeah, well,
well, sort of.
Yeah, I don't know why people think we're devious. I mean, we're just simple bluff storytellers, working our way along. Yeah, this is okay. Let me say one thing. I understand that there are multiple subseries in the Honorverse, but to me, they're not subseries. To me, they are simply all part of the story that's moving forward. Okay. And if you look at it, most of them are divided less by time than they are by distance because the canvas is so big that you can't put everybody, into the same place at the same time. This book was more of a challenge than most of the collaborations that Eric and I have done, because the Crown novels have, prior to this one, they've all followed along behind the point that the mainstream novels had reached. Okay, they're all catching up with the mainstream novel. And in this case, it actually begins at the end of Uncompromising Honor.
Yeah.
I mean, Eric, we got like the first couple of scenes are, I think, actually set shortly before Honor actually takes down the Solarian League, but only by like a very few days kind of thing. And it created some logistics problems that neither Eric nor I had really thought through, because our standard operating model for these collaborations is that Eric does his portion of the collaborations, which in these books is usually substantially larger than mine, because primarily it's his characters that are moving the plot ahead. And then the manuscript comes to me and I do my part. He'll be right, like I say, David blows up a bunch of starships here. It keeps going. You get little things like that. And this time around, it didn't work out real well. And it didn't work out real well because, for a lot of reasons. But the biggest one was that Eric was being tasked to push the entire universe forward, really. I mean, we talked about it. We knew basically what we wanted to do, but there's a big difference between talking about it and having a good firm idea of where you want to go and actually going there. And Eric found himself having to deal with a whole bunch of my characters from the solo books that he had never worked with before, and trying to get them to go where they needed to go is like, they're like, nah, I don't think so. I don't work for you, Eric. Yeah, I ain't doing that. No, you can't make me, kind of thing.
Well,
yeah.
The maintaining the correct chronology in the Honorverse is tricky. It really is. It's so I thought I had it. In some cases I did, but other times I do it, and then it would be like David would read it and say, that's not going to work because there's no way they could get from here to there in the amount of time you gave them. So we'd have to rework it. And the end result, if you look at the manuscript, and you're as familiar with it as David and I are, is that it's kind of, David and I in times past have written single chapters like this, but the whole book is kind of written like this. Most of what I wrote as the first draft is still there, but David has expanded it, modified it, reworked it. Then in some cases I went back and reworked it. And at this point, to try to separate out who wrote what.
Yeah, part of it is also that there were places where I had to rethink the nuts and bolts of how the story action, the story content that Eric had structured in the first place. We couldn't get there the way that he had them getting there because of one constraint or another that's baked into the Honorverse. And so I had to come up with a way that I could get to the same point have the same characters reaching the same conclusions, having the same emotional freight tied up in it. And I think that in some ways, well, okay, this book was a nightmare in a lot of ways, because with my COVID and everything else that was going on, and our discovery that we were going to have to do so much rework, we were actually handing this book in pieces so that Bain could start the copy edit process. And that's always a recipe for disaster if everybody isn't really, really, really careful. So it was not something that we wanted to do. It was something that we had no choice to do because of the timing constraints involved. And what's remarkable is that with all of those things going on, we produced a damn good book.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I've already found a couple of places in reading through it where there are typos. A lot of them introduced by the fact that every word of it went through my dictation with Dragon, naturally speaking. And so there are some errors, word substitutions in there that the copy editor didn't catch. And I didn't have time. Eric and I never had time to do a comprehensive reread on it. We were getting the page proofs in pieces. Okay. And what was it? At one point, Eric had one version, I had another version, and we're like, okay. And normally what we do is we're moving them back and forth, in review mode with comments and everything else. And now we had like at least 3 people involved in, well, 4 with Tom, because Tom was writing hard on us to make, Tom Pope was writing hard on us to make sure that we were staying in canon with the technology and so forth. Same on you, Cindy. I saw, now you made me lose my thought, but which is not that hard to do these days. But,
to follow up, when you described the difficulties you had with this novel, I wonder, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, do you use outline, like a proper outline for co-writing this book?
Oh, outlines are for wusses. Well, okay, what we do is, I wouldn't call it well, Eric, I would say that what we do is a very bare bones plot synopsis. Would that be fair?
I don't know if I call it, well, let's see.
Synopsis might be pushing it too far.
It's, well, let's put it this way. What you and I come up with is less detailed than the plot outlines I'll do for myself. And it's more general, kind of, we know where we're going. In the 3 previous books we did in the Honor Harrington series, the only problem we ran into, we did in Cauldron of Ghosts in some, toward the end, in some of the big battle scenes. Basic rule of thumb is this, as far as action scenes goes, I can do small scale unit actions, no problem at all. The bigger the battle gets, the trickier it is for me to do it. Because that more and more of David's, remember, he invented all this. So the more and more of his parameters come in that I may not be aware of or may not have thought through exactly how they're going to sync with each other. So what we wound up doing toward the end of Cauldron of Ghosts was I just actually stepped back and stepped out of the way, and David finished the big battle scenes toward the end of it, because they had just reached a scope that I was just wind up making mistakes. which wouldn't happen in most of the novels he and I have done in the Honor Harrington version, where they involve big battles or big fleet movements. He doesn't. I don't. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. But most of those books involve smaller scale action that's more narrow focus on individuals. But the problem with End and Fire was that there was a sense in which the whole book was like that, because there were a lot of things that had to be done from scratch. For instance, I wrote the first draft of the sequence that takes place in Hole in the Wall, where our heroes crack and get information out of the alignment that they encounter there. But the way I did it didn't work. Part of the problem is I don't think either you or me or anybody had ever taken on that particular technological issue before. So David had to rework it and make it work. And the way he did it, if you look at it, is it actually doesn't work. What happens is they fail, but they're serendipitously information that comes in as a result of what they're doing that enables them, combined with other information, to figure out what's going on. It was that kind of a process, and this keeps you up at night, especially when you're under a deadline, especially when you're past the deadline. Way past the deadline, and
you're supposed to turn the book in a year before it releases. And I think that we got it in before September the 1st. That's the best we managed to do on an October release. I don't think there's another traditional publisher out there that could have gotten this book together and out in that time window.
A part of what happens is it's been a long time since I turned in a book a year ahead of publication. But I can usually manage 6 months. Well, I mean, that does give the publisher time. I mean, they're not, under the gun. But part of what happens is I once got irritated at some person who was taking a snide remark about David and saying, well, sorry, who made the snide remark that David refuses to listen to editors anymore because he thinks he's such a big shot. And I said, no, you don't understand the realities of publishing. David is Bain's most popular author. And I don't sell as well as he do, but I sell very well. And when you are generating that much of a publishing house's income, they want the books. And honestly, you get a heavy schedule. You do. And it's, and it's not that easy to just say, oh, well, let's take off 3 months. In order to polish something all the way down, because it's just not the way.
Well, I think,
I don't know why the far lefty like me always has to be the one who explains how capitalism works to people who say they love it, but I do. And that's how it works, it's
that's part of it. Once upon a time, as Sharon is fond of pointing out to me, I would take 3 months off between projects. Okay. And she says, I cannot remember the last time that you took 3 weeks off between projects now. And I do get edited. Okay, first of all, let me say that Tony Weisskopf is one of the best editors in the field. And one of the hallmarks of what makes her such a good editor is that she will identify a problem, but not tell you how to solve it. Okay, she will say, okay, this is the issue I have with what you're doing here. And then she leaves it up to you to find a way to resolve that issue in a way that works for her and works for you. And I think a lot of people who haven't done editing, which I have of other people, don't realize how difficult it is to not say, this is the problem I found, and here's the way I think you should fix it. Okay, that second half of that sentence is, it's hard to not say, and this is how I think you should fix it. Because you're an editor, you've identified the problem. Clearly, you have an idea about how it should be fixed. But the integrity of the process really requires you to allow the author to have freedom to take a shot at fixing it himself or herself. I will say that so I handed in uncompromising honor, and about a month and a half after I handed it in, I was up in North Carolina at Bain's office, and Tony is like, well, David, I went through the book and looking for places to cut, and I have a list for you. And I said, oh, really? She said, yes, it's a list of scenes you need to add. There were 2 scenes that she said, you need to put these in there, you know, kind of thing. I said, well, that's going to push it work. I'd say, shut up and just put them in, you know. So I said, okay, fine, you know. I think one of the things, and I know I harp on this on panels and whatnot, but one of the things that needs to be borne in mind is that what draws readers to a writer is that writer's voice, the way that writer tells stories. Now, when they're being read in translation, it's even more of a collaboration than usual, because you have to hope that the translator is going to capture the feel of the original story, which was written in a totally different language. Okay. But even there, it's the fusion of the original author and the translator that brings readers back for the next book and the next book and the one after that. And nobody's writing style, writing voice is completely unique, because we all sort of like, writing voices are kind of like coral reefs. Okay, they accrete, and they're part of the product of everything, not just that you've written that's gone into developing, but everything you've read that has added a little layer of DNA of coral to the way that you write. Sometimes it's like, ooh, that's really cool, I need to see what I can do with it. Sometimes it's like, well, thank God I didn't do that, you know, kind of thing. But I don't know a single writer whose voice isn't continuing to evolve continuously. The only people I know whose voices aren't continuing to evolve continuously are dead, and ghostwriters are trying to reproduce their style. Okay. I think if you stop evolving as a writer, then you might as well stop writing. Because You know how characters grow and evolve in a novel? Okay, like, the Honor Harrington of On Basilisk Station is not the Honor Harrington of Uncompromising Honor. She's still in there. Okay, but the later Honor Harrington is also a totally different human being who spent 25 or 30 years evolving. Okay. Well, as the writer of a character who has evolved that long, I've evolved right along with her, if only in terms of how I understand her and the other characters in her universe. Does that make sense? And Eric, I think, you're having that same evolutionary process going on, I think, especially in 1632. And in your case, it's complicated by the sheer number of collaborators and solo writers that are part of your literary universe.
Yeah, because I have to adjust to the fact my co-authors are evolving also. And the 1632 series is a very unusual series in one respect, which is that this is a gamble on my part, going back 20 years. The iron law, so to speak, of series is that each book should read the same. I don't mean the plot will be different, the story will be different, but the book should be very familiar to the voice of the author should be familiar to the reader and comforting, because like, yeah, this is what I expected. And so,
they should be close siblings.
Yeah, right. Well, that's not true of the 1632 series, because I make no effort at all to get my different co-authors to all write the same way. And they're quite different, many of them. And what I try to do instead is develop stories with them that I think will fit them well. But it means that the books in many ways read very differently. A book I write with Virginia DeMarce is not going to read the same way as one I do with David, or one I do with Gorkoff and Paula Goodlett, or one I do with Chuck Gannon, or one I do with Walter Hunt, or one I do with David Carrico. They're all going to read quite different in many ways. And that makes the series kind of, to be honest, a little unforgiving for readers, because first you're getting a lot of voices tossed at you, and then then there's just the complexity of the plot and the interaction of the different stories. So I've had a lot of people who enjoyed it, but they say, oh, I just kind of gave up because I couldn't keep track of where it was. I figured that would probably happen. That the gamble I took was I thought that the complexity would be an attraction for a number of readers, that they would actually like that, which is in fact what's happened. But yeah, writers change over time. There's no, I know I have, and I'm not sure how you wouldn't, to be honest. Partly because, my writing career's now lasted a quarter of a century. David's has lasted longer than that. And that's a long stretch of time. That's half my adult lifespan. And the odds of somebody's not going to change much in that stretch of time is pretty unlikely.
Well, I think if you go back and you read, okay, The Apocalypse Troll was actually my first solo novel. Okay. That was actually bought. But it didn't come out for like 10 years. Okay. Because other things were getting in the way, et cetera, et cetera. So the book got rewritten like 2 or 3 times because the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, you know, little things, you know, that had to be allowed for here and there. But when the book came out, at least one reviewer said reads like very early David Weber, and I was like, well, yeah, there's a reason, you know. But if you read that book and then you read Uncompromising Honor, you can tell it's the same voice. But you can also tell that that voice has evolved a lot over that time frame. But basically, I sold that novel in 1990. So that's like 31 years ago this year. And when you stop and you think that you've been doing this since 1989, because that's when Bain bought Insurrection from me and Steve White, you go like, wow, no wonder there's so many books on the shelf. Okay, you know, it's like I had to do something with myself for, you know, 30 years. But I have to say that to be allowed to support yourself doing something that is such a fundamental part of who you are. I don't think I know any successful professional authors who wouldn't be writing on their own for their own enjoyment, even if they weren't being published. I think you've got to have that kind of a bug, that kind of a need to tell stories, to put words on paper or whatever, if you're going to have the endurance and the, for want of a better term, the inspiration to write successfully as a professional for any lengthy period of time. Have you found it that way, Eric?
Yeah, with one, I don't know, qualification, whatever you want to put. I started writing when I was a teenager, and by the time I was 16 or 17, I'd written 3 novels, one of which I thought was good enough that I paid a professional typist to make a good manuscript out of it. Cost me $60, which is a hell of a lot of money for a 16-year-old kid back in, you know, I don't know, the mid 60s, early 60s.
I thought that was like more like the 40. Oh, never mind.
And that continued on until 1970. And in 1970, I became a political activist. And that is in itself such a kind of all-consuming, because something you do on top of a job, and I was never able to do that and write at the same time. I just couldn't. So I stopped writing for quite a while, except for there were a couple of periods where I would be inactive politically for a year or two, and then I'd go back to writing. So for that reason, from the age of 22 to 45, roughly, I did very little writing. And then when I was 45, I at that point stopped being politically active, and it was partly because frankly I was tired, and it's a rough life. You're always broke, for one thing. And I sort of, enough was enough. But the other thing was that I really didn't want to be on my deathbed regretting the fact that I never finished one novel I was really attached to. So I said, screw it. So I retired, so to speak, from political activity, and I started writing again. And then from that point on, yeah, my experience is the same as what you're describing, David. But I did have that kind of long hiatus.
Yeah, but during that long hiatus that you were having, I would argue that the energy, the drive that would have been going into writing,
Yeah.
you were channeling into something else.
Oh, no, that's absolutely true. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true. And, yeah, somebody once made a snide remark at me that, well, you just pissed away, 20 some odd years of your life. And I said, well, it depends on how you look at it. You can argue I did not succeed in my goals, certainly, but on the other hand, that experience is what produced me as a person, and I would not be the same writer without it. I mean, there's no question about it. And it's and as I don't try to inject my political views into my writing in any direct way, because for a variety of reasons, one of which I think it's ineffective, because for reasons I could go into at length, but I'm not going to. But beyond that, I just think it's false advertising.
Well, I agree. I think that, okay, no author can create a literary universe that isn't informed and illuminated by that author's values.
right.
Even if you're setting out to build the villains in that universe.
Yeah.
And in that sense, the more real life experience you have, the better job you're going to do of building that universe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are things, that have things that I did or that happened to me that had a profound effect on how I view the world and whatnot, and that's incorporated into my writing. I'd like to go back to something that you said, Eric. You said you didn't want to be on your deathbed and not have finished the novel. I think I said this, I think in our last podcast, but I think it bears repeating. My favorite quote from John Paul Jones is not the one where he said, "I have not yet begun to fight." It's actually from a letter that he wrote when he was corresponding with the Marine Committee in France about getting a ship. But what stuck in my mind is a sentence from one of his letters, and the sentence is, "It seems to be a law inflexible unto itself, that he who will not risk cannot win."
Mm-hmm.
And that's a profound statement when you think about it. And there are a lot of people who are like, I could be a writer. I could be a writer. Okay, but if you're not willing to risk failing at it, if you're not willing to put the words on the paper and find out whether or not they're marketable, whether or not you can find a publisher who believes in you, publish it yourself, whatever, you cannot possibly succeed because you'll never start. And so one day you'll suddenly realize that you've gone from saying I could be a writer to saying I could have been a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that most successful writers, and I'm classifying successful here, not necessarily in an artistic sense, but in the sense of someone who succeeds at a level that allows him or her to support the writer and or family, by choosing this as his profession. You've got to you have to be willing, ready to find out that you can't do it, or you'll never find out that you can. I could have been published 10 years before I was, if I had been prepared at that point to risk having all of my novels rejected. Okay. Jim Butcher, I was at a convention with Jim, and he was talking about a writing course that he was taking. And he'd done like 3 novels, and they just poof, they were lying there. Nobody was buying them. And the instructor in the course is like, well, you really should listen to what I've been telling you, write the book the way we've been discussing in class. And Jim was like, no. And the guy's like, okay, fine, And Jim said, okay, fine, I'll show you. I'll write a book that way. And he did. It was the first Harry Dresden novel. Okay. Yeah. He said the only fly in his ointment when the book succeeded was that he had to go back to the instructor of the course and say, okay, you were right.
We have a question here that I promised I would ask, and
yes,
you mentioned it a little before. What's your experience with being translated, and did you interact or at least correspond directly with your translators? And Eric, David, who wants to start? Translation.
Go, Eric.
Well, the problem I have is that I do not speak or read the language, any of the languages I've been translated in. I can read French rather well, and could probably make it through Spanish and Portuguese, but I've never been translated in those languages. So whether the Polish and Russian translations of what I've written are good or not, I have no idea, because I just don't read those. I just don't know those languages well enough to read them. So I can't answer the question. I think if I had somebody who was completely bilingual and could read it and tell me that they might, be able to let me know what or how it succeeded, but I just don't know.
I have had conversations with a couple of my translators. My French translator, for example. And if you have an opportunity to do that, one of the things that happens is you wind up with a better gauge for how well that translator understands the characters, which is going to be a key element in how the work is translated. Now, I was at EasterCon some years ago, and I was on a panel with several translators. And one of them was a Spanish translator. And she said, English is very difficult to translate into Spanish. And I said, really? Because I was pretty fluent in Spanish at one point, and hadn't used it in 25 years by that point. So I'd lost most of it. I was like, I didn't find it that hard to speak, in Spanish. And she said, hey, think about it. She said, first of all, there is not a single noun in English that you won't turn into a verb. I can't do that in Spanish. Okay, it doesn't work. She said, and then there's dialect, okay, because you guys do dialect by leaving letters out. I can't do that in Spanish either. It doesn't work. And she said, but the thing that is most frustrating in some ways is you have so many swear words in English. I have to start repeating them in Spanish. There aren't enough Spanish swear words. My German translator is sitting there. He says, not the problem. So I was like, that to me, in a way, really kind of summed up the interdependency of the languages involved in any translation of someone's works. And like like I said earlier, it is in some ways the most intimate of collaborations, and yet it is one in which, because you don't speak the language, you are unable to ever truly form a judgment of how well the translator captured what you were doing in the book. Now you can take a look at like sales and say, well, whatever we did, it worked, or okay, that wasn't so good, but it's probably the translator's fault. Yes, it's the translator's fault. But it's kind of like, I remember when George C. Scott was being his most, I am an artist kind of thing. And he was talking about an Academy Award. And he said, if you're going to get the Academy Award for Best Actor, the only way you should get it is if you're doing exactly the same part with exactly the same director and exactly the same supporting characters, everybody else that you were up against, and you did it better than they did.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, okay, I can understand what you're saying, but that particular approach only works in, I don't know, literary constructs, because otherwise, how do you deal with the fact that every single movie, every single play, by its very nature, is this deep genetic level collaboration. Okay. And I think that's one reason why I'm happier as a writer than I would have been as an actor. Okay. It's not just that I'm a control freak. Okay. Not solely that I'm a control freak, but when you are a screenwriter or a director or an actor in a cast for a movie or a theatrical production, your success or failure is intimately bound up with all those other people who are interacting to create the vehicle. When you're a writer, it's usually just you and the editor when you come down to it. I mean, if you've got beta readers and all of that, but writing is a very intimate process. Okay, it's if you are going to create a character who is going to speak to the reader, that character has to speak to you first. That character has to have enough depth, enough reality, and be sufficiently unique that he or she becomes a fully fleshed human being, or whatever species she happens to be, before you can share that with a third party when they're reading your novel. I'm not saying that I expect to see Honor Harrington walking up the sidewalk to my front door. If I did see her walking up the sidewalk to my front door, I would run and hide, because I would figure she was there to get even with me for all the things I've done to her over the years. But, excuse me, but I don't think about how Honor Harrington would react in a situation anymore. Okay, I don't have to say, how is she going to respond to this? It's like, boom, there it is. It happened. Okay, I know exactly how she's going to respond to it because I know who she is. If you see what I'm saying.
And speaking of movies and actors, is there anything new with the TV show or movie? I know it's a popular question, but it we ask every once in a while.
Well, okay, there's both the Honorverse and 1632 are kind of in that. We are considering the possibility of approaching it as an animated property rather than live action. And when you look at where folks are today with anime technology, with the CGI and everything else that's involved, I think it could probably be done very, very effectively as an animated feature. But I don't think that the Honorverse is going to lend itself well to cinematic production. I think it's going to have to be an ensemble cast. I think it's going to have to be a multi-episode story arc rather than a 2-hour movie or even a 4-hour movie. Or a series of 2 or 4-hour movies. Now, if you had a successful series that could lead to movies down the road, but I think that would be the way that we'd have to come at it. And I think that in some ways, Eric with 1632 might find that even truer than the Honorverse, simply because of the scope of your physical campus that these folks are running around on and interacting upon.
Yeah, there's been a fair amount of interest and continues to this day, but it's all the idea of doing a movie, a TV series out of it. Not trying to make a movie. And you could do a movie out of 1632 because it does work as a standalone novel. But even now it would be difficult. I mean, it's a 180,000 word book, and a typical movie script for a full-length movie is about 20,000 words. So you'd have to cut one hell of a lot, and it could be done, but everybody I know in the movie TV industry who's been interested in it, is quite a few. It's always the idea of doing a TV series out of it, because it actually would lend itself well to that.
There are many high quality historical TV shows being made right now, like in historical settings.
I'm sorry?
That there are many high quality historical TV shows being done right now, like in historical settings.
Yeah. And the one problem that you could do the first book comparatively cheaply, but beyond that, it starts getting to be a pretty expensive proposition. And, and that is one obstacle. There's no question about it. I mean, there's been several quite successful TV producers who looked at it and like it, but just say the budget would be too big. I'm not prepared to take that on.
Okay, Eric, it sort of leads me to a question I have. Like, how did you get the idea to, land American City in the middle of 30-year war Europe? Like, how did you come up with that?
Well, say that again.
How did you come up with the idea to, place an American city in the middle of Europe during the 30-year war?
Well, that wouldn't one of the person I'm working most closely with is to the TV producer who produced the Hatfield McCoy's miniseries for the History Channel, and they'd film in Romania because the terrain is quite similar to West Virginia, and you know, you could actually do it. That part wouldn't be too hard.
Eric, I think the question was, how did you come up with the idea of moving Grantville?
Oh, how did I do it? Oh,
yeah, to you know, the
Main
notion
idea.
of dropping them in.
Oh, okay. How did I do it?
Yeah.
In my earlier incarnation as a political activist, I was politically active in northern West Virginia for about a year and a half. And I lived in Morgantown myself, which is a fairly big town. But I got to know all those small coal mining towns quite well. And I remember at the time thinking that any one of these towns would make a really good collective protagonist for some kind of adventure story. But I hadn't figured out what the story was. And it wasn't until years later, when doing research for a completely different novel, which actually never wound up getting written, I had to do research on mercenary armies, and the great heyday of mercenary armies was the Renaissance, the early modern period. But I was thinking in particular 30 Years' War, which I had not studied since college. So I picked up C.B. Wedgwood's History of 30 Years' War and started reading it, and I realized, I don't know, a third of the way into it, that this would be the ideal
Eric?
Eric has frozen.
that Americans at least like to read about, where you can draw the maps and show the arrows and everything is coherent and makes sense, and you know, and now if you try to draw a map of the 30 Years' War in terms of where the armies went, it's just going to look like a bowl of spaghetti. Most of the battles happen just because two armies collided with each other, is what it amounted to, while they're out plundering. And that's exactly what I needed for the kind of story I had in mind, which is sheer chaos. And so that's where the idea came from. Now, in order to make it work, though, I had to move the whole town. I couldn't just move the people. They had to have the resources of the entire town available to them, because for no other reason, that's the only way they'd be able to survive.
Mhm.
1632 is not predominantly a military story, but I did have to get that small town of 3,500 Americans through an initial period where they were able to survive. And if you were to take an equivalent 3,500 people from Manhattan, they'd have a hard time surviving. It's just not the same. And it's not just simply a possession of firearms. That's part of it, but it's more to it than that.
Well, if you pull somebody outside the infrastructure that they, for want of a better term, have evolved to thrive in,
Right.
then you are automatically putting them in a really, really, really stressed environment. And if you had taken a bunch of folks from Manhattan and dropped them in, they would have been a lot shorter on the skills that they needed to survive than your coal miners from up and in our hills were. One of the things that you have to do, you have to cheat if you're an author and pre-select your characters to have the traits they need to succeed, or figure out a way to give them those traits and those skills pretty quickly. And I have to say, one of the things that irks me sometimes about the way that people react to Honor Harrington is people say she's too perfect, she never makes mistakes. She makes mistakes all over the place. Okay, I mean, okay, Honor of the Queen. Okay, she shoots a prisoner without a trial. She misses because somebody shoves her arm at the last second, but she had the muzzle against his forehead and she squeezed the trigger. So she was going to kill this guy in cold blood. Now, he deserved it, okay? And the fact that he deserved it is all my readers like, yes, you go, girl. That's what you should be doing. And I'm like, oh, she's a military officer. She's the commanding officer of this thing, and she's just going to go around summarily and you don't see this as a problem, you know? And like, no, man, you go for it. You know, I'm going like, okay, well, I see where part of our problem is here. You know, that's why I actually have Michelle Hinkey examining her tactics at Cerberus, as she concludes her analysis of it by saying, in short, if it was not the most extreme case of all or nothing, go for broke, no fallback position in the history of galactic warfare, I have yet to discover the plan that was. Okay, basically she's saying this was a bad plan. Okay, it really was a bad plan, and Honor made it work anyway. Okay, but it was, no, the guy who wanted to send back word, you know, the guy she winds up locking up, you know, etc. He's the one who was, yes, this is what you should be doing. Okay. and so it's like, no, you know, and I have never been able to figure out why it is that so few of my readers recognize the mistakes I bake in that I have her making. And the only thing I've ever been able to come up with is that the mistakes I have her making are almost inevitable mistakes for her to make. And therefore, people don't see them as a mistake. They see whatever she's doing as being perfectly consistent with her character, which they are, and therefore not mistakes. And I'm going like, I don't know. Yeah, probably, you know. Well, yeah, it's like when she's getting ready to shoot the guy on Blackbird Base. Okay, the readers are like, yes, he needs to be dead. Okay, Honor, go take care of that, you know, kind of thing. And you're not thinking about the other responsibilities that she has, you know. That's why in Honor of the Queen, that's why I have Hamish Alexander say to her, you have the vices of your virtues. Okay. And I'm like, oh, readers, you know, look right here. Hamish Alexander, he said, she's got the vices of her virtues. Okay. Pay attention. I'm like, oh, Hamish, you're such an old stick in the mud. You know, what do I do? What do I do? You know.
Okay, there's a question someone posted on the Facebook group, and that's actually a question for Eric, but it kind of concerns David. it's from a fan who remained anonymous, but it's that now that the Honorverse is wrapping up, are you, Eric, looking forward that you will no longer be blamed by David for David not killing Honor in at all costs?
Or David's what?
Blaming you for not killing Honor.
You are looking forward to David not.
Yeah, I know. He well, actually, he doesn't blame me for not killing Honor. What he blames me for is saddling him with the headache of figuring out how to proceed with the series without having to kill her off. That's really what he's grumpy about.
Well, what I'm grumpy about is that, well, I'm not grumpy about it. I'm actually fairly happy, but actually very happy. But the problem is that when we pulled the whole Mason alignment thread forward, starting with from the Highlands, the problem was I couldn't kill her off and then let her children grow up in time to deal with what I knew was coming down the pike from the Mason alignment in the future of the series. And I don't know that I would say the Honorverse is wrapping up. I would say that I am probably going to be looking at doing some books that, for example, I've always wanted to do the novel of Alfred Harrington's Marine career. And I mean, people, here's Alfred Harrington, this big tree that, Honor grew up under the branches, the teddy bear, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And probably the only person in the entire galaxy better at killing people than Honor. Okay. And people don't know, it's kind of like the story that I did for House of Steel with Roger Winton and the part that he played in putting the structure that allowed the Star Kingdom to survive in place. I knew that was there from the get-go, but I had never had really a place to hang that in the series, because it happens, most of it happens before Honor is born, really, if you think about it. And so there was never a place in the novels to do it. And I was so happy to finally be able to do it, because it was really too long to do in one of the anthologies. That's a 60,000 word novella. Okay. But then I did what I think of as the courtship of Honor's father in Beauty and the Beast, where Alfred and Allison first meet. And in the anthology that we are handing in now, it really begins right at the end of Beauty and the Beast with, how shall I put this? The origins of the breach between Allison and her mother, and how we how we got there. You find out that Allison is maybe a little more bloody-minded than most people may have thought she was. Okay, I mean, it's kind of like, okay, Mom, I'll tell you what. Kind of thing. But
speaking of
blood, I was going to say, but I see possibly where we are now as an opportunity for me to do some of those, explore those other areas of the Honorverse. It's really what I've been doing with Tim Zahn and Tom Pope, and with the Star Kingdom novels, with the early days of the relationships between humans and Shree Cats. When I began the Honor Harrington series, I really didn't realize how big a canvas was going to grow out of those books. I always knew that the novels were going to be as much about the fighting of the war as they would be about the character of Honor Harrington. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why there are as many secondary characters, because the big problem with writing, for example, historical fiction, is there are already people who won the battles in real life. Okay, so you can't stick your character in to win all the crucial battles. Well, if it's a fictitious universe, you can stick your character in to win the most crucial battles. But unless they're fighting on a planet the size of Connecticut, okay, that character cannot be everywhere that critical action is taking place. And so you have to have room in your story concept to let those other characters in. And so you wind up with a Tom Theismann and a Michelle Hinkey and an Alice Truman. And they wind up off in other parts of the galaxy doing stuff that Honor is not directly associated with in any way. There's another aspect about Honor, and I think this, you can see this in To End in Fire, and not just where Honor is concerned. But Honor doesn't succeed because she's a superwoman. I mean, okay, I cheated. I gave her, the genetically modified heavy world musculature and the killer hand-eye coordination. Okay, fine. I admit it. I cheated when I did that. But Honor's successes don't come out of her own sheer brilliance. Honor's successes come out of her ability to convince other people to perform at a level that they would not have performed at without her. Okay. It is she builds and is the focus of extraordinary people who may not have realized they were extraordinary people until they entered her orbit. And you can see the same thing with Victor and some of the other folks who sort of, except falling into Victor's orbit is a much more traumatic experience than falling into Honor's. And Honor's, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get killed. Okay.
It was actually one of the questions people asked, like, who invented Victor Kasha and Anton Zilvicki, and what thoughts were going into that process of these two characters?
Well, okay. I invented Anton Zilvicki for one scene in one novel. And Eric needed a character. And so we were going through, it's like, no, you can't have him, he's dead. No, you can't have her, I got plans for her, and he's like, well, what about Anton Zilvicki? I said, well, yeah, sure, go ahead. And he was off to the races.
Yeah, just to make it clear, David has a reputation for having an extraordinarily high body count in his books, and it's mostly an illusion, because what he does, I actually learned a trick from him, I've used it myself, is he doesn't actually kill off very many major characters. He's done it a few times, but he doesn't do that very often at all. What he does in every given book is he develops one or two characters enough that they seem like major characters, you care about them, then he kills them off. And what happened was, I wanted he and I had agreed on the story I would write for the anthology, and I wanted to use a character that had appeared in one of his stories. So I started reading on Basilisk Station and got through Honor of the Queen. He kills off all the people I could use. And then it wasn't until I got to Short Victorious War that I ran across Anton Zilvicki and his 4-year-old daughter, Helen. And they survived that initial scene. And then I called him up and I said, did you kill off Anton Zilvicki later? And he had to think about it. And he said, I don't think I did. And I said,
so many bodies. I mean, who can keep track?
Now, Kasha was a somewhat different thing. I came up with him because I wanted to come up with a radical, politically radical character who'd be a Havenite, but I had to make them. I wanted to make them both quite radical and at the same time sympathetic enough that readers could accept them. And the character of Victor is modeled loose after a Chekist in the Russian Civil War, say around 1919. Now the Cheka was a precursor to the NKVD, but in that initial period, it was quite a different kind of outfit. And but the thing about Victor is you have to be able to be on his side, but he's got to be very, very hard-edged and frankly kind of scary. And I had a lot of fun developing him. And he's a lot of fun to work with. Probably my favorite story about Victor is the second one I wrote, Fanatic. But he's been fun to work with all the way through. It's just being able to maintain that kind of this guy could be a real monster, except that he does have actually a very fairly rigid and a moral code and one he adheres to, which is what keeps him on the side of the angels. But boy, he'd make a hell of a good devil. I think it's particularly fun writing people's reactions to him. I remember in Crown of Slaves, I wrote that the first of his, well, the first and really the only one I ever carried all the way through of his interrogation episodes, where he demonstrates Victor's sort of very hard-edged methods of interrogating someone, which is he doesn't believe in torture. He thinks it's for amateurs. And it's just really very simple. You tell me what I want to know or I'll kill you. And then he proceeds to kill somebody just to prove the point. And this is somebody it'd be awfully easy to not like, but he's got enough vulnerabilities and he stays enough on the side of the angels that readers like him. He's actually quite a popular character, much to my surprise, but he is. That's how he came about. And then we wound up using him in many other ways. And then a friendship between him and Anton developed based on that first story. And that's developed for a number of.
Yeah. Well, in one honorverse convention, I don't think if it was the first HonorCon, there was a poll among TRMN members. Who would you like to have on your side during a brawl or in a pub? And most people said Victor Kasha.
Oh, and not Victor. The problem is the body count would climb too high. Anton would be fine. The best one would probably be Kevin Usher. But or Bryce Tarkovsky, the character we've introduced.
Nah, if you really wanted somebody on your side in a barroom brawl, it would be Honor.
Well, yeah.
I'm just saying.
That's true. That's true. See, the thing about Victor is that he's not that physically capable. What he does is because of his personality, his temperament, he maximizes whatever he's got. But there's a scene in I think it's Cauldron of Ghosts, if I remember right, where Tandy Palani, his girlfriend, finally sees the video that was done in the caverns of old Chicago in the first story From the Highlands, where Victor kills a whole bunch of of villains. And she's watching this, and what she finds so incredibly impressive about him is not what he does, because she knows that if she'd been in that position, she would have been even more deadly. But not at that age. I mean, this is the first gunfight he's ever been in. And what carries him through is just the raw nature of his personality, and just, which is really unusual. I mean, and that comes up a number of times in this series, is that it's what he does with himself rather than, he's not the fastest gun in the West. He's not strongest. He's not a master of the martial arts or anything like that. But
what he is a corgi.
Is what?
A corgi, the dog breed. Because corgis, if you ever watch them, okay, they're all in.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, they don't care that, okay, so I'm the size of the head of this, dog that I'm, and that's Victor.
That is.
And I'm not saying in excitable, bouncy or whatever. What I'm saying is that, okay, Victor actually reminds me in many ways of a fellow who I knew years ago, who was a ex Naval Special Forces guy. And he had exactly two speeds. One was, what can I do to help you out? And where do I hide the body? Okay, I mean, that was it. If you reached the point where he was no longer, you're not my friend that I'm trying to help here, okay, then you entered the category of potential obstacle. Okay, and his theory was he'd never met an obstacle he couldn't remove with a sufficient quantity of C4. And absolutely most loyal person I ever knew. Okay, and he would, be on your side all day long, and you had to be really, really careful that you didn't say, "Who will rid me of this pestilential priest," in his hearing. Okay, because he'd have gone out and done it in a heartbeat. And that's Victor in a lot of ways. Okay, it's like, it's not so much that all problems are nails and he's a hammer. Okay, no. But it's that all problems have a very simple solution. You just have to figure out who to kill. Okay, and it'll all come right in the end. Guys, I hate to say this, but I am running up on a hard time element here, and I am going to have to be pulling out here. It is 3:30 my time, and at 4 o'clock I'm going to turn into a pumpkin. There are things that will happen that I need to go and deal with. Do we have a wrap-up question?
Yeah, actually we were coming towards the wrap-up question, so you are right on time, David. Actually, great minds, And the wrap-up question is simple: like, what's the next book for you, both of you? Like, what's your upcoming project right now? I never said it was a simple question. I never promised that. But...
Yeah. Well, let me jump in here first. From a logistics viewpoint and a writing schedule viewpoint, To End in Fire is a train wreck for what I was planning on doing. Okay, and it's not the only train wreck. Okay, it's like over here on sighting 3. We've got. But I've also got to do some significant rewrite on another collaborative novel that has come in. And when you crank the COVID and everything else and the health issues, I am way behind where I was planning on being at this point. Right this minute, I am working on wrapping up the next of the Manticore Star Kingdom novels with Jane Lindskog. Richard Fox and I will be shortly starting on the sequel to Governor in the Fury universe. My next solo novel has to be the next Safehold book. My next solo project for Bane has to be the sequel to Sword of the South. And somewhere in there, Joel Presby and I have to do the sequel to The Road to Hell. And Chris Kennedy and I need to do the sequel to Into the Light. So it's, you know, I'll put it this way. Toni Weisskopf's rule of thumb for me now is that she won't schedule a David Weber book until she has the manuscript. Say, but this was an Eric and David book, so she thought she could get away with scheduling it, but I showed her.
Yeah.
People were also asking about the Manticore and
I
Ascension
think now
book, yeah.
both of us are, well, I think she'll still schedule me on working on my own, but yeah, I don't think she's going to do that again if it's the next time David and I work together. I'm not, I'm actually not too far behind, just because, for one thing, Bane, for reasons I actually don't understand, but they didn't really schedule me for anything in the first 8 months of next year, which is unusual. So I've got a bit of a breather there. The next book I've got coming out is in December. It's called 1637, The Coast of Chaos. And it's an anthology, but all the stories are connected and related to each other. So to some degree, you can think of it as a braided novel. And I have the opening and longest story in it, which is a short novel I wrote with Gorokoff and Paula Goodland, whom I've collaborated with on many books. And it takes place it's part of the 1632 series, and it takes place on the coast in question is New England. And various things happen. The next book after that is, I'm doing a book with Kevin Eikenberry, which is coming out in August. And the central book is the one he's written, which is called The Crossing. And it's an Acidi Shard novel that's follows the same pattern as books I've written, like Time Spike and the Alexander Inheritance. It's not directly part of the 1632 series, but it's part of the overall framework of Acidi shards hitting the earth and causing time transposition. And in this case, it takes a squad of military cadets on maneuvers and plants them in the middle of toward the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, right on the eve of the Battle of Trenton. And they have their modern M16s. The problem is the only ammunition they have is blanks. And I'm writing a novella that links to it, which is called An Angel Named Peterbilt. And I've got to write that. I want to get that done by the end of the year if I can. Then the next solo novel I'm writing, next big project, is the third of the Sam Houston novels that I began that series with Del Rey, published 2 of them with Del Rey back some years ago, Rivers of War and the Arkansas War. And then I had I don't know what you want to call it. It wasn't falling out exactly, but Del Rey and I parted company, and Bane picked up the series. So I'll be doing the third book, and that will be coming out probably the first trimester of 2023. And in the meantime, I'm going to have by the end of this year a couple of 1632 novels finished, so that Bain can slot them in whenever there's a slot opening. And other than that, I'm working a whole bunch of stuff, but it's at different stages of completion. I'm working on a total of 1632 novels. And what I mean, they're all underway. They're all being written. Some of them are further along than others, but I'm doing a lot of those. I've got a book that, never mind, I could go on and on. It's not like I don't have plenty of stuff to do, but I'm not actually under the gun right now. Which kind of surprises me, but I'm not, which is nice. It's nice not having that kind of pressure. I think that's it.
I think Marla was telling me that for like the next 6 or 7 quarters in a row, I have a hardcover coming from Bain. And at this point, I don't even know what they all are. I mean, you know, it's good, but
it's a beautiful note to end on.
yeah.
Well, I was, for many years, I was always under deadline pressure. I mean, I was really scrambling to get a book in on time, but that kind of ended. And ironically, it was the same year, 2017, that I came down with cancer. And I was kind of not able to do much work for about 6 months, but in the period prior to that, I'd gotten a lot done. So in that year, which happened to be also the year I turned 70, I had 6 new novels come out in that year. And I gleefully went around thinking, not really saying it out loud, but, you know, take that, you whippersnappers.
Yeah.
But that kind of put me ahead.
Yeah.
And I've never really fallen behind since then. So, which is nice.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's unusual for me. I mean, the last few years, 3 or 4 years, I've been not really under great deadline pressure. I've done a lot of work, but I was far enough out that it wasn't that sweating, which David and I went through attending fire.
I have to tell you, the only good thing about the way that a bunch of folks are going to react when I drop dead with series unresolved is that I'll be dead and they won't be able to get at me for dropping dead with the series unresolved.
Well, you know, it's yeah, the thing about Ten and Fire that we haven't talked about, that when David laid out to me what he wanted to do, I realized he was getting his revenge for the fact that I had saddled him with a problem, because he still needs to come up with a 20-30 year hiatus in the story so that things can catch up. And so we had to buy that time in this book, basically. So I said to him, so the gist of it is, you want me to plot out a novel where our heroes struggle mightily and fail?
No, they didn't fail.
Well, no, they don't, except that.
People have not read the book yet while
All
you're
right,
talking about this.
All right. The book's out, so they should have read it by now.
Been out for 2 days, Eric.
Yeah.
Anyway, when people read the book, you will see that it's I think we did actually a good job of pulling.
Well,
combining.
parts of what is the structure that lets this work in this book were always there in my thinking even though I hadn't taken the reader to visit the planets involved and whatnot. And because I hadn't taken the reader to visit them, I hadn't worked them out in the kind of detail that I do when I'm actually going to use them as a setting. And so there was a fair amount of trimming and adjusting the jigs to make everything work the way that it needed to work. But I think that the reader is going to be deeply satisfied and still be going that how shall I put this? They'll be satisfied enough they'll forgive us for the ending. How's that?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so.
And I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And I know David needs to get some rest. We've been talking about that in the chat all during the whole interview.
Yeah, well, not only that, but I've got to call into my doctor. That's where I need to go, because it's coming up on 4 o'clock my time.
Okay. So,
and yeah.
So thank you both for coming, and we've greatly enjoyed it. And we will show this on Comic-Con Prague next week. And I hope, Eric, you enjoy your convention appearance next week as well. And as for the others, we are going to turn off the recording. And if you want to hang out and just chat for a while, possible.
Okay, and will you be posting the link to this, or how's it gonna work?
I think we will first show it next weekend at Comic-Con, so it's like first time there, and then we will probably post it on YouTube. Okay,
that's what I wanted to know. Okay, guys, thank you for letting me come, but now I must go.
All right, I'm gonna be going too.
All right, you guys have fun.
Bye, David.
All right.
Bye.
Oh, I can.
The host would